Good evening, everybody. My name is Amudan. I'm part of a group called Marupakam. Yeah, we are doing the film festival, 22nd Madurai International Documentary and Short Film Festival, and we started the festival this morning. And as part of the festival, we are having this series of Zoom interactions with the filmmakers. This is the third meeting for the day, and we have today Tarun Bhartiya and his team who made the film. Sramjit and we have Aswathy to moderate. So let me invite Aswathy to take charge and start the proceedings.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you, Amudan, for this wonderful initiative. Personally, Madurai Film Festival has been quite an exciting experience and something one has been hearing for quite a long time. And Amudan and his set of friends from Madurai have managed to pull it off through support from friends and comrades for a really long time now, more than a couple of decades to be precise. And personally, I have attended the program once, the film festival once, and it was quite like, the logistics of it was quite amazing for me to see because it included, it shifted from colleges to media schools to like local domestic terrace spaces. So it was a mix of all of those things, and there were a wide, like, young set of people who are making these things happening also, and Amudan being the one pulling it off, like, putting everyone together for something like this. And so congrats, Amudan, for managing it this year also. In spite of the pandemic. So this year, I think there are a couple of, it's happening virtually and also physically in Madurai. Because of ill health, Amudan has not managed to um, attend the physical event, which could probably be the first time, I think, in the history of Madurai Film Festival. So, because the times are also such that we are seeing the one of the worst economic and health crisis we have ever witnessed, probably in our lifespan, and to wait through that time, I think initiatives like this has also like helped us maneuver through some of these crises as well. In fact, initiatives like Marupakkam, Cinema of Resistance, a lot of such groups have, even during the lockdown phase, had started a weekly film screenings and conversations with filmmakers, etc. And personally, I have attended, Marupakkam's Friday screenings, which start off on Friday, and the film discussions on Sunday. I've tried to attend like, regularly, but of course, like, it doesn't happen in that sense. But today we have with us Tarun Bhartiya, who's a well-known documentary filmmaker. I won't go into an elaborate introduction. I think in the course of the conversation, we'll bring in aspects of his work. And here we are particularly discussing the film Shramjeevi. And we have the camera person and also the producer of the film along with it. And we have a few people who have watched the film and willing to join this discussion as well. So once again, welcome everyone. Welcome Tarun, Apal, and um, Abish Tarun. Sorry, I forgot
Ashish Pali.
Ashish. Yeah, sorry, Ashish. So I think I'll start off with you, Tarun, because it's the film in itself, for whoever who has watched the film, it's quite an interesting, exciting experience. Like how Abhishek just started off very animatedly before we started this discussion about how it is something that one can, especially in the metros, it's one of the very common sights to see the laborers walking and trying on, like dealing with their everyday. So could you, if you could start off by discussing the process of the film, because it says it's by the workers. The film is by the workers. So what does that mean, and how was the process of the filmmaking? If you could start off with a bit of that, then we can move on to the other aspects, I think.
Uh, Thank you, Ashwati, and thank you, Madurai International Documentary and Short Film Festival. It's a festival about which I've heard a lot, from friends like Sanjay and both Sanjay Joshi of Cinema of Resistance, as well as Sanjay Kak, about this very interesting festival, which is a non-competitive festival, which has, I have always wanted to visit it, but it finally turned out to be the virtual way of visiting it. And Amudan, obviously, everyone has heard about it. Anyone who's interested in cinema culture or documentary culture in this country, he is quite a well-known name. So, thanks for having the film as part of this festival. Shramjeevi came about in a. I live in Shillong, which is a small town in northeast of India, and it came about, the idea itself that something should be done came through Ashish Paliwal, who was in touch with people who are working with uh, workers as well as their children in Kapasera, and they wanted, initially the idea was that the children of the workers, they were going to put on some kind of a annual function, which is part of the film, um, to document that particular process. So it all began like that. But obviously, a film, if one is going to place like Kapasera, and um, one cannot escape in that sense, looking at the larger world what Kapasera represents. So we in some so I went from Shillong, and Apal came from Naini, he lives in mountains somewhere in Uttarakhand, and we decided to live in Kapasera because it was a film which could not have been made um, by every day going and fixing and trying to do a normal kind of documentary, because you can't do it like that. One needed to understand the place, one needed to understand its rhythms, one needed to meet people, see these things. So we hired a place in Kapasera, and we lived for almost a month and a half there, shooting, meeting, researching. So the whole experience of living there is what made this film in that sense. And it did not begin as a film initially, as a simple film about workers' lives. It began as a much more narrower thing, to look at children's lives there and the fear under which they live. So it all began as that. So that's how it began. And it was like a film made by people. I've lived in Delhi, but I've lived in Delhi many many years ago, so it was also someone going from a foreign land to a new place in that way.
I think that is also where the role of the camera person, like we were talking about earlier, comes in, because as like some of us who have been part of processes of filmmaking where tries to cover a workers' movement or a forest, andolan, or any of such resistant movements as such, there is always attack, or in the sense surveillance from the authorities that one has to be. So it's a very very touchy space also, I think, where one has to be like very smart on your toes, think through things as well. So Apal, if you could talk about like how you managed to, in those 1.5 months, like be in make that interaction or that connection with the community of workers, and because they also are always at the fear of being targeted as well, and it was shown in the film also in that sense, and that's something that all of us at some level who has worked engaged with workers movement, student movement, Devika is here, so I'm sure she'll also like be able to relate very much about with that, are also part of, you see that intimidation tactics where they'll come and write your name, they'll come and take your photographs. So, what was your experience as like camera people, like filmmakers in the process? What are the kind of struggles that you had to face while in the making of the film?
Apple, unmute, please.
It's muted up.
You have to unmute your microphone, Apple.
Yeah, I did that. I thought we had a chat.
Hmm. Okay, now we
Yeah,
can hear
please
you.
go on. Yeah.
Okay. So, as Tarun had just mentioned, that we were living there And this film would not have been possible if we were not living in Kapadseda. If we were living in some hotel or somewhere in Delhi, probably this film would have been very different. And when we talk about the process, Tarun also mentioned the fear. And it is not just workers people who live, the community of people who live there, who lived in the fears. We were living in the fear, day in and day out. The very first day of our shooting, the morning was okay, comfortable. We were working with a sympathizer worker, but by evening we were hounded by two drunk people who were ready to snatch the camera, who were abusing. And so it was baptism with fire. And just few, I think a month or 2 months, if I'm wrong, that before the shoot, Ravish had done a story, a story on Kapoor. So the landlords there, they were dead against anything to do with media. The moment we took out the camera, there was a certain kind of aggression, definite aggression. So the whole shooting, the whole process was, I don't know if the film would have been slightly different if we were not living in that fear. At least I was under constant fear, because whenever I was pointing the camera in the front, I was always worried. I was not so worried about focus and exposure and what the image is. I was worried that, if somebody from behind is going to slap me or throw some abuses, remind me of my mother's and sisters' body parts. And constant, this was something constant. So I think, as a camera person or a director, sound recordist, producer, you're part of, in a documentary, you're part of the process. But here it was, I think it took to another level. We were constantly negotiating.
Yes.
Every moment, every shoot was a negotiation. Either we are lying, we could never say that we are making a film on workers. I don't know how many stories I came up and narrated. Sometime I was doing an anthropological film, sometime I was doing a history film of the village. I don't know how many thousands of stories we created. So this particular film, I would say the process, if I have to define in one word, the process was fear. That's how the film came out.
I think that's an incredible way to put it. And even in the course of the film, also, it is shown like how the workers are also in constant fear, right? Like at one point, one of the workers talks about how, there are supervisors behind them who will look at them and will be like monitoring everything, giving them galis constantly. So I think it was probably a slice of what they were experiencing inside that you had to probably as filmmakers also face it, which also comes through. I think I'll open up the discussion for like a few 10-15 minutes now, because we have to wind up by 6:50. So in the middle we can come back to some of the other questions that I had. But if there's somebody in the in the discussion right now who would like to ask something, they can either raise their hands or unmute themselves and ask the question. If not, we can move ahead with something. Is there somebody who would like to ask, or I can? अफाक भाई, आप कुछ बोलना चाहते हो? सो हमारे पास साथ अफाक भाई है जो फैज़ाबाद से यूथ रिसोर्स सेंटर से जुड़े हैं. दे एक्चुअली डिड अ स्क्रीनिंग ऑफ द फिल्म टुडे एट 4 o'clock एंड आई थिंक पीपल हैव लेफ्ट द कम्युनिटी. मतलब वहाँ से जो लोग हैं वो शायद घर चले गए, पर अफाक भाई अभी भी वहाँ पे है और डिस्कशन में जुड़े हैं. अमुदन, आई थिंक आई स्विच टू हिंदी फॉर द टाइम बीइंग बिकॉज इट्स मोर कंफर्टेबल इन दैट सेंस. तो थैंक यू, बहुत शुक्रिया अफाक भाई कि आप लोगों ने देखा. तो फिल्म के बारे में कुछ आप बोलना चाहते हो तो बोल सकते हो. कैसा लगा आपको?
जी, थैंक यू अश्वती, और बताने के लिए इस फिल्म फेस्टिवल के बारे में. अमुदन का भी थैंक्स. अमुदन से पहले भी मिले हैं, और तरुण भारती जी ने भी अच्छा एक प्रयास किया है, अच्छी एक बांधने की कोशिश की है. मेरे साथ फिल्म में शुभम साथ में है, जिन्होंने इस फिल्म को स्क्रीनिंग किया है, और इधर अनुभव है जो अभी 9th क्लास में पढ़ता है. तो ये सारे लोग, और भी कुछ साथी थे, अभी चले गए हैं. तो ये फिल्म मतलब मैंने इन लोगों से थोड़ा पहले देखना शुरू किया क्योंकि टीम को आने में थोड़ा टाइम लगा, तो मैंने 2 बार देखा लगभग इस फिल्म को आज ही। तो एक तो ये कि फिल्म मजदूरों के सवालों को उठा रही है, पीड़ा को उठा रही है, क्योंकि दिल्ली को मैं थोड़ा समझता हूँ, देखता हूँ, तो वाकई मतलब अपने घरों को लोग छोड़ के दूर दराज से, बिहार से, उत्तर प्रदेश से, कहाँ से भी जाते हैं, और जो दिल्ली में उनको सुख सुविधा, मतलब जो उनके श्रम के बदले जो सम्मान मिलना चाहिए, जो वेतन मिलना चाहिए, जो सुविधा मिलना चाहिए, वो मतलब इस क्या बोल सकते हैं, इतने आजादी के दिनों के बाद भी लोगों को नहीं मिल रहा। और वो एक जो महिला बातचीत कर रही है छत के ऊपर बैठ के, वो कह रही हाँ, ये सोच के आए थे कि दिल्ली में चलेंगे तो कुछ अच्छा काम मिलेगा और जिंदगी शायद अच्छी होगी, लेकिन वो नहीं हो रहा। लेकिन कुछ लौट के जाने पर भी कुछ उस तरह का काम नहीं है। तो फिल्म में काफी कुछ बताया गया। बस एक सवाल है मेरा, या मैं उसको पकड़ नहीं पा रहा था या समझ नहीं पा रहा था कि ये जो पूरा एक कोई सोशल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, कोई ग्रुप्स है, जहाँ एक तरफ मजदूरों का आंदोलन चल रहा है, मूवमेंट चल रहा है, लोग अपने सवालों पर जद्दोजहद कर रहे हैं, और दूसरी तरफ वो मतलब उसी बस्ती के लोगों के बच्चों के साथ, यंग लोगों के साथ वो डांस या कल्चरली एक्टिव हो रहे हैं, नाटक कर रहे हैं। तो इससे क्या बताना चाहते हैं डायरेक्टर साहब? मतलब मुझे तो ऐसा लग रहा है कि जो एक मतलब उनके जो मुख्य सवाल है, उससे फिल्म बता रही है कि लोग दूर ले जाने की कोशिश करते हैं। ऐसा मुझे दिखा कि शायद क्या दूर ले जाने की बात कर रहे हैं कि ये जो मुख्य सवाल है उससे नौजवान दूर रहे, या ये बताने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं कि चलिए पीड़ा है, दुख है, वो उस दुख में भी कुछ खुशी या अपने लिए स्पेस लोग बना रहे हैं, ये बताने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। तो थोड़ा इस पे अगर बात करें तो थोड़ा मुझे समझ में आए। थैंक यू।
पहले तो ये कि शुक्रिया फैजाबाद में फिर
Aswati, just translate just what, just do it, just do it.
Yeah, sure, sure. No, so Afaq Bhai was asking about because he understands also the workers' movement in that sense, and especially Delhi, because he keeps going and coming back from Delhi. But one thing that he was not able to understand was about like those two things that were juxtaposed. One was the struggle of the workers, and one was the children of the bastis who were in that cultural group. So, how is it? Are they is the director or the filmmakers trying to sort of imply that they're doing those cultural activities and they're like sort of engaged from those political, or worker struggle in that sense? Just to add on to that, Afaq Bhai is also associated with a group called Delhi, like Young Artists Forum. There is a group called Delhi Young Artists Forum, which actually works with children of youngsters of bastis of Delhi, and he works very closely with them as well. So I think probably some of those questions also came to mind. So yeah, Tarun, you can, or Appal, one of you can speak.
uh, uh, I would say it in English because
English.
English is fine. Okay. Um, mm, uh, you know, the obviously, the in a very factual sense, the children of workers, they are in that space because it's a space set up by workers movement. In that sense, it was at one level they wanted unions wanted an entry into Kapasera, and if you go in as a union, I'm sure you will find it more difficult to enter those spaces. So they started almost what you consider a social work, cultural kind of a thing. Um, but it was, I don't think it's a merely a pragmatic um, attempt on the part of the workers' movement, because traditionally the question of politics, everyday politics of fighting for your wages, fighting against fear, fighting against surveillance, cannot be dissociated with questions of everyday life. And I think as progressive movements, uh, there has been slowly a movement away from creating a workers' political culture. And political culture also, and what I really liked about Tarang's work was that they were not doing the usual street play, but they were doing things which children like. It's like almost giving meaning to the lives, to your own lives in that sense. We don't always go and shout slogans, but if your own life is not, if you are not assertive about your own self, and I think that particular, and it is at core of the film, what those children are doing, what their excitement, their fear, their even, a kind of a pessimism they hold. But those are the things you have to confront if you're going to make a political film. Because I personally, um, the kinds of films I have worked on as director, as editor, or I have shot some, I personally think that that dialectic between, you know a kind of an ideological narrative versus what is happening has to always exist, I think. So for me, that's a political thing. It's not about taking away people from politics. Actually, that particular space helped the union to get in, to talk to workers, and show them that union is not only about getting out on the road. Union is about bettering your own life.
Yeah, I think in a country where social movements cannot be separated from cultural activism, I mean, not just in the country, even like worldwide for that matter, I think this is one of those one of those instances where they've shown that juxtaposition. And it's about, like, probably having worked with Delhi Young Artists Forum quite closely. In fact, I had sent the link to them as well to watch the film and probably attend the session, but they were busy with this 16 days of women empowerment thing that's going on, right? So they've been doing every day something or the other. So they're busy with that, hence they could not join. I think we'll come back to that question of the everydayness and the struggle a little later. But before that, Devika, if you would like to add something.
Yes, hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
There's some internet issue here. So what
Yeah.
I found really interesting also, like, and now that in the conversation also that Tarun had also pointed out, that that there's this sense of everydayness that the worker also has, that the union also works with the people, and even in the film that kind of comes to life, even in terms of like वो जीवन किस तरह से जीते हैं रहते हैं, and even what I found interesting was the different kind of relationalities that came into the fore, not just मतलब एक तो कंपनी और कॉन्ट्रैक्टर के साथ एक रिश्ता जो रहता है, और उसका एक काइंड ऑफ प्राइमरी कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन किस तरह से अलग अलग श्रेणी में आता है, एंड ऑल्सो अराउंड what I found interesting was also around the landlords के साथ जो relation दिखाया है, that how is the kind of the economy in that area and the rent economy kind of working and functioning in that little kind of space. And मतलब वो बोलते भी हैं कि यहाँ आके मतलब गांव से भी बदतर है, and Kapasera is very interestingly also like geographically placed, मतलब there is the entire like area, and then वहाँ थोड़ा देर आगे ही there's going to be like Palam Vihar and all those big kind of multi-story रेजिडेंशियल कॉलोनीज, एंड उसके साथ भी किस तरह का एक रिश्ता रहता है, where there are a lot of domestic workers who kind of work there and live in Kapaseri area. So that was a very interesting thing that came about. And if मतलब वो थोड़ा बहुत film आया, but also if you would like to talk a little bit more around the kind of relationality with the village, because मतलब आप एक तरह से when you were in, like making the film also, you would talk about कि किस तरह से the village की history के बारे में you were kind of making a film, and how did that relationality kind of come about when you were formulating your ideas also around the film, and with regard to the workers kind of living there and experiencing that space?
Obviously, in terms of Kapaseda as a village, an urban village, um, which within a generation has transformed from a very agrarian kind of a feudal order into its very close connection with this uh, um, n- new capitalist relations in that sense. So that was something, one of the things which is not there in the film, and actually that will, if one lived further, is the within the village itself there are contradictions of caste, for instance, even in the landlords. Apple would remember that. Remember, we shot with those studio people who were from lower caste, and they were equally frightened. So their relationship with the migrant worker was one of, so there were multiple hierarchies there. So there were these landlord which who you see in the film, who are the most influential one, but there are landlords who traditionally in the village would have come from, you know, other castes who are under the oppression of that, but they in their turn oppress the migrant workers. So it's like so many levels of, and it is not there, we've shot with it, but that was something which we could not explore much more in depth. But I think places like Kapaseda need to be explored much further. I think, there are other questions of, for instance, landlord women don't appear in the film, and they are the people, landlord women are the ones who in some senses police the rental accommodations on behalf of their husbands that way. So there are certain things about that, but the everydayness is something which Apal, me, and Pali, Ashish Paliwal, that's what, because we realize that you are not going to get spectacular images of resistance and of those kind of things. What you're going to get is what is happening, people walking to work, coming back from work, and through that everydayness comes, if that can express the kind of fear and surveillance of this new capital. I think that was what, you know while editing, that was one of the things which I was looking for, because the images one was getting, as Apple said, was not something which you can plan. You can, even to interview someone, where would you interview is the was the question. Like, even to shoot inside Udyog Vihar, which is the modern factory place where Gap and all these, we went, and I remember Apple went ahead, and then he was taken in by the factory guard and made to sit inside for, remember, the person, uh, you know um, and he was made to sit, and what are you shooting, and the usual questions. So if even the modern places, people may argue that Kapa Seda is a more traditional feudal kind of a thing, so that's why the violence is there. But even in the modern part, which was the factory part, it was very difficult to shoot. So, only thing we could do was to just walk around and travel with on the bike and shoot those factories. So this is what the new the new capital is all about. It's all about fear, security. That's the kind of thing. Hope that comes through in the film.
I think couple of things that you talked about right now, that systemic, violence and those structural inequalities are also things that are coming out right now. Like even with the farmer struggle or women's movement, like there's constant like reminding of those differences, be it caste or be it class or be it gender, constant reminders of how those hierarchies actually work, and it's not only about a certain like like vividly like thing that you can see. There are also those subtle nuances and the ways in which different things operate, that probably is something that you experience, something that you might not want to show on screen as well. Just Kavita had a question, but before that, since we were talking about the everyday of the image, I was in fact quite struck by the sound, choice of use of sound in the film, because it felt very. I mean, there were a lot of these everyday, people waiting, talking to each other, the rickshaw, the border Delhi every day that one sees, and also suddenly there are those corporate ads that come in between, and H&M ads, and जो उनका मतलब जो भी whatever their CSR video footages and all of those things, and mixing them together was quite, and the transition from that everydayness into those ads and then back to their everydayness was quite interesting to view, and that sort of shows the sort of fragility of the whole system and sort of unearths the way in which the whole capitalist corporate surveillance also operates. So, could you speak a bit about the sound part of it as well?
Pratik is not here. Pratik, who did our sound, mixed the sound, but these sounds were there while shooting, and obviously, in terms of when you put together a film like this, um, you are listening for everything in that sense, from a rickshaw bell to, even things like one of my favorite sequences in the film, which I wasn't there. Appal used to just go around shooting, and it's a very nice sequence of these two people collecting zakat.
Sorry, keep this one.
Hello.
Just keep this.
Hi.
Aditi,
Can you
can
hear?
you just mute your mic, please, Aditi?
Yeah.
It's a lovely sequence of these two people collecting, donations for some Sufi thing, and they have this small tape recorder, and it just goes through in this empty kind of a thing. But about the other, the corporate films, the advertisements, because usually films like this concentrate so much on really interesting lives of the workers, of the working classes, of the subaltern classes, that we forget that they exist in really structural relationship with something which is very global in that way. And how do you bring that? They are not going to talk to you. We tried talking to them, but they are not going to talk to you. So what is the image you have? So you have Marks and Spencer, and you have, and then um and that was a surprise. It came through from the dark net, in that sense, part of YouTube. I don't know, someone had uploaded, and those Lagan films which the company has dubbed to teach. So if we are doing, let's say, quote unquote, propaganda for the working classes, even the corporation is doing propaganda for the working classes, to discipline them, to teach them, "Ki, if you do this." And I've really found that fascinating, and I think it adds to the film, and also lets you step out of this bleak life and see that how this bleak life is connected, created in relationship with this really glitzy, you know because those corporate films, I personally hadn't seen some of them. And so when one discovered it, one realized that that has to be part of the film in that way, because you see how those factory owners, those multinational companies want their workers to be. It's their voice. It's the voice of the from the top.
No, in fact, CSR videos is something that one should actually like look at, look for in YouTube as well. There are these videos by NTPC, like coal mining factories, where these about women empowerment, how they've made women workers learn driving, and they are the ones driving, and how it makes them independent without giving like any background to any of the kind of harassments or displacement or loot that they have experienced in that. So I just wanted to say that it's a good category to sort of research a bit on. Sorry, Kavita had left because she had some emergency, I guess. Abhishek, would you like to add something? Because you started off even before we had the conversation, came in very excitedly. If you would like to add something or ask something to Tarun or Apal for that matter. Abhishek, are you there? Okay. Aditi or Ramdas, if you would like to add something, you can just wait for a minute.
Hi, Ashwati and Tarun.
Hi.
Yeah, it's a wonderful movie. I watched the movie. It's a place. Delhi is a place where I lived for a long period. So definitely, it's a when it's a going back to that situations, and it's a very important topic which you have taken up. So thanks for bringing this film, and thanks to this film festival also for showing this film. It's a very good film. I enjoyed it a lot.
Okay. So I just had another aspect to bring into, because Tarun is also a political activist and also a writer who's based out of Shillong, as we said in the beginning, who's also part of Three Essays Collective, which is a publishing firm, and also Write, which is an online portal. And some of these, we were talking in the morning about some of these initiatives which are not necessarily metropolitan based, right? Like, probably initiatives. And it's so important that there are initiatives like Madurai Film Festival or Gorakhpur Film Festival or Chachitra Abhiyan from Shamli or the Chhattisgarh based Rinchin, like Ektara Collective and all of those groups as well. So how do you see, work that comes out of such close interaction with movement groups by political activists? Tarun, if you could speak a bit about that.
You know, one of the things is that very simple. I always tell people that um, if you work from a small place, and what if you're doing documentary or whatever, you will be meeting the same person next day. So you better be sure that what you're saying is correct, which gives you certainly a take on your own life in a very different way. But apart from that, I think in terms of cultural production, and sadly what it, and Apple will add to it, who has been associated with all kinds of small town cultural movements, it is in last 20 years where the cultural production has moved to metropolises like Delhi, like Calcutta, like Bombay. Some of the greatest magazines in Hindi used to be published from places like Muzaffarpur, from Jaunpur. And decline of the small towns, decline of these places are not accidental. And so it's very, very important to, in that sense, challenge. And that's why things like, now, Gorakhpur Film Festival or Madurai Film Festival, or there are multiple kinds of small town. That's where culture is being created. That's what we need to challenge, because big cities, Delhi, for instance, I have had most interesting experiences in Gorakhpur film screenings rather than in Delhi. And which is because Delhi is full of consumers of culture in that sense. Culture for them is another evening out. But in Shillong, for instance, in Faizabad, for instance, culture means something. You culture gives you certainly a much bigger meaning to your own life. So for me, when this is a film made in Delhi, but most of my filmmaking, personal filmmaking, has been set in place where I live. And I always think that, like, I've done a series of films, documentaries about music and folk music, and first screenings I have always had is in village halls, because I think that's what makes, why is one making a film, and especially documentary like this. You're not making a film for only purposes of showing in film festivals, are you? So I think we need to recapture the periphery in that sense, make periphery more important. There's a friend of mine who has a joke, everyone talks about mainstreaming the Northeast or mainstreaming these small places. He says, let's Northeastize the mainstream rather than mainstream the Northeast, so it is that. And I think personally, I think that being in Shillong for me is like living in New York in that matter, because remember, if Delhi becomes more important than Shillong or Jaunpur or Patna, then tomorrow New York will be more important than Delhi. So it is, so rather hold on to one's margins rather than try to get into the center.
Apple, would you like to add something to that?
Um, I think not to what Tarun had said, but to the earlier question of sound, maybe Pali could share his experience at this point. I remember one particular sound uh, which I grew to learn, because there were there were one thing which was shooting every day without fail. One was around 8 when the workers go to the factory, and the evening when they come back. So we were almost every day we were shooting that. And I remember, I think I told Pali and Tarun after a week or so that there was a definite sound to it, which was the workers, they start from small lane, then they go to a bigger lane, then they go into the road. Roads have traffic, buses and honking, but the smaller lanes have different sounds. When they're getting out, there were different sounds. So I remember telling Tarun and Pali that these footsteps are haunting me. and it took me some time for me to realize that, you know, why is the sound starting to disturb me. I really don't know where I'm going with this, but this is one sound which stayed with me through that experience.
In fact, as part of the Chalti Tasveerein, which was a 45-day traveling film festival, we had in Madhya Pradesh, there was this Century Workers textile mill, and they're still on struggle, like on strike, because the company had shut off the production and everyone there was unemployed. And when they were on strike, we'd reached there and we had actually screened modern times. We put up the kapda on the actually on the gate of the company, on the company gate, in front of which people were staring and were on strike, and we managed to project it there. And that was one of the greatest experience personally in my life, to see how workers were sort of, you know, like connecting so well with the kind of modernization and the capitalism and workers, the way in which things were getting that. So that also, like, you know, right now when we are sitting and having this discussion on Zoom, me in Kerala, you in Shillong, and you in Nainital, and Amudan in Tamil Nadu, and Devika in Assam, I was just also wondering what are the possible. It's amazing कि अफवाक भाई वहाँ पे मतलब लोगों के लिए screen कर सके with, you know, like, I think there is also that possibility of like having these film festivals not just on physical spaces, but at the same time giving access for people to do such initiatives in their areas without spending that much money. But it also restricts a lot of mutual interaction, I think, because of probably language and movement, travel, and all of those things. And the kind of conversations that happen on, social, on as digital platforms, there is a quote unquote risk of surveillance as well. So if we could wind up by talking a bit about, like, what are the future for such film screenings and film productions and viewing together and sitting and watching together and chai pe charcha on, like, you know, some of those shots or movies, or experiences of producing or making such films as well. How do you both see those also, like, in the coming days?
You
Tarun,
know,
if you could
yeah,
start.
you know, uh, one of the most exciting things of last 20 years now of documentary filmmaking in India has been the rise of the screening culture. Because and I think that has made the fundamental change in the way documentaries are seen and, you know, perceived. There's some great documentaries made before that, you know, produced by, you know, there's some really great documentaries, but there was less and less possibility of showing it in that. And that spaces, new spaces which were created by festivals like Cinema of Resistance or Madurai, or then from there to colleges. And if you notice, one of the uh, it makes me feel happy and also very sad. The first real crackdown by the Hindutva fascist government has been on documentary screening. If you look at, some of the key events, whether it is Rohit Vemula who organized the screening of Muzaffarnagar Baki Hai, to Jashne Azadi, the protests and the so government. So, like, one of the things used to be that one, now when you make a film, you write to your friends who teach in a college or a university and tell them that, yeah, I've made a new film, can I show? Now it's getting more and more difficult. You have to get permissions. And so I think that as documentary filmmakers, we have to obviously find new spaces. And personally, and I may be very Luddite about this, personally, I don't think YouTube and Vimeo are the primary space for me. I think the act of watching together and discussing together is a political act. Maybe, like for instance, my daughter now, they get online together and, they watch a same film and talk. Maybe that's a kind of a thing. But I still feel, that maybe I may be old fashioned about it, that uh, as soon as possible. And that's why I was excited to see Faizabad thing with social distancing and everything, people sitting and watching. And I think I have learned much more by watching together, discussing, not liking the film, arguing with the filmmaker, arguing with the film. And I think this is what we need to achieve. We can't let this 20 years of work about organizing traveling screenings to these kind of things, be lost. Because I think state and the government knows that this is quite a dangerous activity, and because it's a dangerous activity, we need to save it, I think.
I think that is a good note on which we can sort of wind up this discussion, because at 7 there is another discussion, I suppose, and Amudan had given me time till 6:50, and I think we are dot on time. If Abhishek, are you there? If you would like to add something, if not, Amudan, Apal, any concluding words? If not, we can pass it on to Amudan. And Amudan,
Yes,
I
please.
think it was great, like, in that sense, I think watching the film and also having this discussion. And I think we can continue these probably. And I think it was a good call on Amudan's said also to not probably have like a full FB live or YouTube live of this, because then there is a certain comfort with which everybody can probably speak with each other. And it's a small set of people as well. And I think such initiatives on a regular aspect needs to be continued. And I completely agree with Tarun on the fact that we need to have initiatives like Awadh Cinema कलेक्टिव जो अफापाई चला रहे हैं वहाँ पे, वैसे बहुत ग्रुप्स है. So if you're able to also like provide such films to them, because often it becomes very difficult to like identify what are the films that are there. So people like Sanjay Joshi जो मतलब north में काम करते हैं, they make sure that you get the film, he distributes the film. But like it's also very very important that you know which ones to watch and where to access them. So I think groups like Madurai Film Festival or Marupakkam or cinema festivals for that matter, and documentary filmmakers also for that matter, make some of these films available for people, or make a repository of some of these things on a regular basis. That will be quite helpful for groups also to know, because it's not about giving access to something, it's also knowing which spaces to have access to, I think so. On that note, I'll pass it on to Amudan. Thank you so much, Amudan, for having us.
Yeah. Thank you, Aswathy. Thank you, filmmakers and the team member and the audience members for joining the discussion. Thank you for sharing the film with us. I really enjoyed the film, the way it was made. Many of us really enjoyed the film in our group also. So thank you for sharing the film. And
Oh yeah, sorry, I was
yeah.
just reminded that was there in my note, but I forgot. Amudan's Dollar City, Surabhi's film on the Bangalore garment workers are also like some of the other films that I think, as a continuation of this, I think as a thematically we could probably refer to.
Yes,
Some.
Surabhi's film Jerry Murray and
Yeah, Jerry Murray.
Yes. Okay. So thank you very much. So let us wind up wind up the discussion now. So we are going to another discussion at 6 o'clock with the film Mannu, Malayalam film. Ramdas Kadavulu is joining us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aswati.
Thank you so
Yes.
much. Bye. Bye.